Welcome to The Deep Dive, the show that takes critical research and breaks it down custom tailored just for you. Today, we're tackling something that sounds straightforward, but really isn't extinction. Specifically, we're diving into a paper called Assessing Extinction, led by Jason Baumsteiger and Peter B. Moyle. And our mission today is to get a handle on the core puzzle this paper presents. How do we actually know, in this age of massive human impact, when a species, or maybe more accurately, a lineage, is truly gone, globally extinct?
Yeah, it's a fundamental challenge. We're living through the planet's sixth mass extinction, and this one's clearly human-caused. Most people think of extinction as, black and white. It's either here or it's vanished. But the reality, especially now, is much fuzzier. That line is blurring, and our traditional ways of thinking about it just aren't keeping pace with how fast things are changing out there.
Okay, let's unpack this. Why does this ambiguity matter so much, especially for conservation? The paper uses freshwater fishes, a really vulnerable group, as its main focus, right?
It does. And the ambiguity is a huge practical problem. Think about it. Legal frameworks like the U.S. Endangered Species Act or international bodies like the IUCN, they're mostly set up to prevent extinction. They're not really designed to assess it once things look grim. There aren't clear, formal criteria agreed upon globally for saying, okay, this lineage is gone. It's incredibly hard to prove with no reasonable doubt that the absolute last individual is dead, especially for, say, a small hidden fish in a complex river system.
So you're basically trying to prove a negative, which is notoriously difficult.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the paper points out this is a real gap. We have categories for critically endangered, but not a standardized process for that final step, declaring global extinction.
You mentioned the paper uses the term lineage quite deliberately. Can you explain why that specific word is important here? What does it cover?
Right. Lineage is broader than just species. It's any distinct taxonomic group that might be recognized for conservation. So that includes subspecies, but also these other units like distinct population segments, DPS, or evolutionarily significant units, ESU.
Okay, so DPS, ESU. What do those mean in practice for someone trying to understand conservation efforts?
Well, they basically allow agencies to protect just a specific, often geographically isolated part of a species' overall population. Think bull trout, maybe they're doing okay overall in Canada, but the distinct population down in California is gone or nearly gone. That California group could be listed as a DPS and managed separately. It allows for targeted protection.
But that complexity also leads to a kind of philosophical question the paper raises, doesn't it?
It does. If a lineage, say, that California bull trout population only survives because we've built fences or we're breeding them in a lab or maybe we've even tweaked their genes, is it still the same natural thing?
Has its evolutionary path been fundamentally changed by us?
Precisely. The authors argue that its evolutionary trajectory is no longer natural. And this leads directly to their big, novel idea in the paper, the concept of gray extinction.
Gray extinction. Okay, so this is meant to fill that gap between threatened and globally extinct.
Yes, exactly. It's a proposed classification system to acknowledge all the ways a lineage might already be, extinct to some degree. It shifts focus from just, is it present, to is it functionally independent in the wild?
Let's walk through these categories. The paper proposes 5 stages of gray extinction, labeled X1 through X5, leading up to the final stage, X6, which is global extinction. What's the first one?
Okay, so X1 is mitigated extinction. This applies to lineages that are basically dependent on us. They need continuous human help conservation reliance. And crucially, this category applies when artificial selection by humans has largely replaced natural selection. It also explicitly includes lineages maintained through intentional hybridization or even genetic modification.
Wow. Okay, so if we genetically engineer a fish to tolerate warmer water, the authors are saying that action itself places the lineage in a state of mitigated extinction because it's no longer purely natural.
That's the argument. Human intervention has fundamentally altered its evolutionary independence. It's a managed entity.
All right, what's the next category, X2?
X2 is regional extinction. This is what most people know as extirpation. Simple enough. The lineage is gone from a significant, distinct part of its original native range, like the bull trout example in California. Gone there, but exists elsewhere.
Makes sense. Then X3.
X3 is native range extinction. Here, the lineage is totally gone from its entire original native habitat. But, crucially, it exists successfully in the wild somewhere else, usually because humans moved it.
Ah, like the Sacramento perch example they use.
Exactly. It's mostly vanished from its native rivers in California, but thrives in reservoirs elsewhere where it was introduced. It's wild, but not where it belongs naturally.
Okay, moving deeper into this gray zone, X4.
X4 is wild extinction. This is a big step. The lineage now depends entirely on artificial propagation, think hatcheries or captive breeding programs. Any individuals reintroduced back into the wild just don't establish self-sustaining populations. They fail.
So the red-tailed shark you mentioned earlier, the aquarium fish, if it's truly gone from the wild now, even though millions exist in tanks,
It would be X4, wild extinction. It exists, but not independently in nature.
and the final gray category before total extinction, X5.
X5 is apparent extinction. This is essentially the waiting room. Despite intensive searches, nobody can find it anywhere. This status triggers a formal waiting period before you can make the final call. X6, global extinction.
Okay, so 5 shades of gray before black. To understand how lineages get into these states, the paper talks about different kinds of human impacts, right? Multi-lineage versus lineage-specific.
Yes, that's a key distinction for management. Multi-lineage effects are broad-scale things impacting lots of species at once. Climate change, widespread pollution, maybe large habitat restoration projects, things with ecosystem-wide consequences. Then you have lineage-specific effects. These are actions aimed squarely at saving one particular lineage. Often, this involves replacing natural selection with artificial selection.
And this is where it gets really interesting. The paper directly links these lineage-specific actions to, essentially, domestication.
That's the core insight. When we step in with lineage-specific measures, like breeding fish in a hatchery for maximum egg production, protecting them from all predators, removing mating barriers, we are selecting for traits that favor survival in our managed system, not necessarily in the wild. The authors argue that once a lineage relies heavily on this kind of intervention, some level of domestication is basically unavoidable. We can't perfectly mimic natural pressures.
Its evolutionary path changes, maybe permanently, making it harder to ever truly reestablish in the wild.
Exactly. It becomes adapted to the artificial environment.
So if we're effectively domesticating species through conservation, we need a better way to track and manage that. Which brings us to their proposed decision tree and assessment committee.
Right, this is the practical framework. They suggest a decision tree with 4 specific checkpoints. Managers would use this to track a lineage's status from healthy through the different X categories, potentially all the way to X6. And to make those crucial decisions at the checkpoint's objective, they propose establishing an Extinction Assessment Committee, or EAC. Think of it as an independent group of scientists, conservation groups, agency experts who review the evidence and make the call on status changes.
That sounds logical, having an independent body, but setting up and running a dedicated EAC, maybe globally, it sounds like it would need significant resources and political will. Does the paper touch on the feasibility?
It acknowledges the need for buy-in and funding, definitely. The argument is that the long-term cost of not having such a system, continuing to pour money into lineages that are functionally gone, might actually be higher. But yeah, the paper focuses more on proposing the structure, less on the detailed logistics of funding it globally.
Fair enough. Methodologically, though, they also tackle that waiting period for declaring global extinction X6. The old 50-year rule often felt arbitrary.
It really is arbitrary. 50 years might make some sense for a species that lives for decades, like a sturgeon, but it's way too long for, say, a fish with a 1-year lifespan. You'd wait 50 generations. So they propose using generation time instead. It's much more biologically relevant.
How would that work?
The proposal is, for lineages with a generation time of 0 to 5 years, you wait 10 generations after the last confirmed sighting. For lineages with generation times over 5 years, you wait 5 generations.
Okay, so a short-lived pup fish might only require a 10-year waiting period if its generation time is 1 year, while a sturgeon might still need maybe 25 years or more. That feels much more tailored.
It does. It aims to prevent declaring extinction too soon, but without imposing unnecessarily long delays for short-lived species. It balances precaution with practicality.
Let's talk about the implications, especially the costs. The paper contrasts those multi-lineage versus lineage-specific approaches in terms of efficiency.
Yeah, this is critical for resource allocation. Multi-lineage approaches things like restoring a whole watershed, tackling climate change, reducing broad pollution, tend to be more cost-effective in the long run. Why? Because they benefit many species simultaneously by fixing the underlying ecosystem problems. Lineage-specific approaches, on the other hand, like running a dedicated hatchery for one type of fish, or intensive hands-on management for just one population, get incredibly expensive fast. And as more and more species decline, trying to save each one individually becomes completely overwhelming, both financially and logistically.
We just can't afford hundreds or thousands of separate intensive rescue programs indefinitely.
Exactly. And the paper really hammers this home, using the example of fish hatcheries, especially for salmon and trout.
How do hatcheries fit into this gray extinction framework? They seem like a double-edged sword.
They absolutely are. Hatcheries are often prime examples of driving lineages towards X1, mitigated extinction, or X4, wild extinction. Fish adapt remarkably quickly to hatchery conditions, sometimes within a single generation. They become selected for traits favoring hatchery survival, not wild survival. Then, when these somewhat domesticated fish are released, they often don't do well long-term. Worse, they can compete with or interbreed with the remaining wild fish, sometimes reducing the overall natural productivity of the river.
So the hatchery, intended to help, can inadvertently create a dependency.
Yes, it can lead to permanent conservation reliance. The wild population becomes genetically swamped or replaced by fish that need the hatchery to persist. It's no longer a self-sustaining natural system. It's essentially fish farming disguised as conservation, often at great expense.
The case studies they mention really bring these dilemmas to life. What about the devil's hole pupfish? Tiny population, very isolated.
Right, a classic conservation challenge. This tiny fish lives in one single cavern pool in Nevada, isolated for thousands of years. The population has sometimes dropped below, say, 30 individuals. It's incredibly vulnerable. So managers face tough questions. They've put up fences, fought legal battles over water levels. But what if they need to start, say, supplemental feeding? Or maybe even consider carefully managed hybridization to counter inbreeding depression?
Would those actions push it into X1, mitigated extinction?
That's the question the framework forces you to ask. If it's reliant on artificial feeding or its genetic makeup is actively managed by humans, does it still qualify for the full protection under laws designed for natural wild species? It forces a difficult conversation about what recovery truly means for such a unique lineage.
And at the other extreme, the delta smelt. Short lifespan right on the edge.
Yeah, the delta smelt is a small fish in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. It lives only about a year. It's facing, frankly, imminent wild extinction, X4, or maybe even global extinction, X6. Numbers are critically low. If it disappears entirely from surveys, the proposed waiting period, based on its one-year generation time, would only be 10 years, not 50.
So the framework clarifies the endpoint.
It clarifies the decision points. If the only delta smelt left are in captivity, effectively domesticated, do we keep spending vast sums trying to reintroduce them into an environment that clearly can't support them anymore? Or do we accept the X4 designation wild extinct and potentially redirect those conservation resources elsewhere, perhaps to multi-lineage habitat restoration? It makes the trade-offs explicit.
This really forces a reevaluation of what we mean by conservation success.
Absolutely. The paper is quite clear. Things like intentional genetic modification, even if done to help a species survive, places it into X1, mitigated extinction. Because human-directed artificial selection has permanently altered its genome and evolutionary trajectory. True conservation success, which they call Cs, is defined very rigorously. It means the lineage is back to being fully self-sustaining in its natural habitat, completely free of critical human interventions. It has to return to the top of that decision tree, essentially back to a healthy, independent state.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? This paper, Assessing Extinction, really drives home that extinction is usually not a sudden event, but a process, a slide through these shades of gray. Lineages often become functionally extinct, reliant on us, domesticated, altered, long before the very last individual breathes its last. This framework gives us the vocabulary and the structure to actually identify and, importantly, discuss that messy reality.
They end with a really thought-provoking point about the future, touching on de-extinction or resurrection.
Right, if we could bring back, say, a woolly mammoth using genetic technology.
According to this framework, that resurrected population would immediately start at X1, mitigated extinction. It's entirely human-created, essentially domesticated from the start. And the authors argue quite strongly that if we ever considered releasing such resurrected lineages into the wild, we'd need to treat them almost like potentially invasive species. There's a fundamental conflict there between just creating biomass that looks like an extinct animal and preserving genuine, naturally evolved evolutionary integrity.
A fascinating and slightly sobering thought to end on. It forces us to consider not just if a species exists, but how it exists. Thank you for tuning in to this deep dive. We hope exploring the Gray Extinction Framework gives you a new lens for thinking about the critical conservation challenges we face.